I have the privilege today to introduce our distinguished guest speaker, Jared Larsen. Jared Larsen is actually a native of Lander, Wyoming, and alumnus of the University of Wyoming College of Law and the College of Business. Jared is a licensed attorney admitted to practice in North Dakota and currently works for Phillips 66 Company in Denver, Colorado as their agent in Real Estate Services Group. In this role, he encounters issues including landowner disputes, litigation, purchase and sale of property, and right-of-way management. Prior to joining Phillips 66, Jared practiced law in North Dakota and worked as a landman in North Dakota, Wyoming, Montana, and Colorado. So without any further ado, take it away.
Thank you. I am grateful to be here back in Liberty today to have the opportunity to be back on campus, talking at the university. Just start out with a quick disclaimer. While my employer has been gracious enough to allow me to use a slide deck with their logo on it, I just want to make the beginning statement that the opinions and things I say are my own thoughts and my own opinions, and aren't necessarily to be relied on for the position of 66. I wanted to take a moment and express my appreciation to the university. I'm excited to be able to talk about land issues and some of my experience as a landman, as a person involved in land transactions and land litigation. I have some interesting things to talk about, but I was really hoping to have a little bit more of a topic given to me when I was asked to speak on this, and the instruction I was given was basically just tell us about experiences from your career. And so, I was thinking about what kind of war stories I have to talk about. And I hardly think I hardly feel old enough to have any war stories to tell. My wife will tell you, if you knew her, that I certainly don't act old enough to have any war stories to tell. But I'm going to do my best to kind of illustrate a few examples from my career as to things that I think maybe you'll find useful. I also know that you guys have taken a Monday to be here to listen to the things I have to share. I understand, having studied economics here at the university, that there's an opportunity cost to everybody's time. And for anybody that may be joining online, I'm going to do my best to make that worth your while. For those of you who are here, you got lunch out of it, so hopefully I'm in the black, at least in that regard. And if nothing else, you got free lunch. I remember when I was at the university, I would have done a lot more for a lot less. So thank you for being here. I think we'll just get started. I wanted to kind of begin with my background in a little bit more detail, so that you guys at least have an expectation that I may know what I'm talking about in a little bit more detail. I grew up in Lander, and I worked in the energy industry pretty much my whole life. As you can see, this is me back in my roustabout days. It was a long time ago. I looked like I knew what I was doing there. Probably a lunch break, but I worked for an oil field construction company that was owned by my uncle and my dad. We worked predominantly in the Moneta Divide area, which is central Wyoming, west of Casper. I don't know how well you can see it, but this is just a screen grab from one of the areas near Waltman, Wyoming, for anybody who's familiar with the area, where we did a lot of work. So these were all vertical wells, I think 40-acre space, maybe a little bit smaller, but we basically spent summers following rigs around as they punch holes in the dirt, and we would do hookups. My friend and I, who I used to work with about this time, would joke that when anybody asked us what we did, we said, well, we're an intricate link in the energy distribution chain. And it was always a joke for us because we were just, below guys on the totem pole. Any fool idiot could have done what we did. So rather than say general labor, we were an intricate link. But I think it held some truth as it really helped round out a technical understanding of the industry, at least from that point of view, and what it takes to bring energy to the consumer. I graduated from the law school here at the university. Just a lot of pictures here. Sorry for everybody who has to see what I look like as a young attorney. Look at me, so precocious and full of wonderment, about to practice law in North Dakota. And in North Dakota, I worked at a law firm called Mackoff Kellogg, where I was able to sit on the other side of the table. I worked on one of the few firms in Western North Dakota that dealt with landowner issues, royalty owner issues. And we dealt in disputes and litigated disputes that were surface damage, royalty payments, surface use issues, and I helped build an understanding for me on the other side of the table was what it meant to the landowners to see this development come in, and when there are problems, how that affected them and their chief concern. I'll talk a little bit more about that in a few minutes. After law practice, I left that and joined up with a small company called Acquire Energy. We were a brokerage firm that was based out of Denver, but was doing acquisitions and title work in North Dakota. So I spent time doing mineral title in North Dakota, and then that transitioned into buying and acquiring oil and gas leases. For them, I also worked in Montana for a coal company for one project, and then transitioned in to doing some work in Texas for oil and gas title and oil and gas lease acquisition. For any of you hoping to get into land work, if you have time in Texas, it's a great foundation because it is the Wild West of mineral title. It's an animal unto itself. And if you've got permitting experience, if you've got Texas experience, you can work just about anywhere else. This is a meme that I did a few years ago at Acquire, and it was based on a true story. We got a lease in for 0.01 acres, and we were glad to have it. So I think things were getting pretty serious, as Kip said. After Acquire, I left that to come on board here at Phillips 66, and I work as a right-of-way agent, in the real estate group, which is right-of-way issues, anything touching and concerning real estate, maintenance, landowner communications, landowner disputes. We do property acquisition and disposal, and I get an armchair quarterback some litigation with the oversight of our legal department. We've done a few temporary restraining orders. I've helped draft pleadings and discovery and some affidavits in that arena. And all that revolves around disputes with our rights and land use in the midstream space. So that's my background. Hopefully I've pled my case to you guys that I do have some experience in this field. I do have some things that I can rely on to talk about, which brings me to kind of the core topic of what I want to convey to you. I'm going to be talking about a lot of different things. I think it's going to be hopefully mostly interesting stories, but I also want to think about kind of three major themes as we go through the rest of this presentation. And that's having foresight, having integrity, and being an advocate or having that advocacy mentality. Foresight, I'm going to talk a lot about in the upstream space, being able to think ahead, think big picture. Integrity, I'm going to talk a lot about in regards of being a person who's contact with landowners, whose contact internally is a reputation of you mean what you say, you're going to do what you say, and being able to support that with the actions of the company or yourself. And advocacy is just kind of an overarching theme, and I'm not going to get into any specific examples of that necessarily in the context that I'm going to talk about, but I just wanted to take a quick minute and say that I think advocacy for the oil and gas industry is important. I've been in the industry my whole life. I love the industry. I love the company that I work for, and I think they're good stewards and good partners in the energy space. And as you guys get involved in energy, in extraction, in oil and gas, wherever you guys find yourself, I think it's just important to know that despite a lot of the public opinion you see, it's a good industry, and it's a necessary industry for the standard of living that we have. And the more I get involved and the more I do, the more I appreciate what really goes into oil and gas from upstream all the way to downstream, knowing that it truly is a industry that makes our lives better and makes them more productive. So just taking the opportunity to share that that position. It's a great industry. It's going to be here for a while, and all forms of energy are important, but oil and gas is something that's got us to where we are, and it will continue to help us in the future. Playing ground is on the upstream space, or adventures in mineral title and lease acquisition. Start out kind of talking about, I guess, integrity and foresight. As a landman in North Dakota, I had the opportunity to meet with and talk to a lot of mineral owners and landowners as I was buying leases. And inevitably, a lot of those older landowners who had been there for years and years didn't know who I was, had never heard of my company, and they wanted to know who they're dealing with. So as a matter of course, I made an offer on the phone or however I had communicated with those guys that I was available to meet with them and discuss any questions that they had. And every time one of those farmers, those ranchers, those landowners took me up on that offer, it was a pleasure and an opportunity to go out, to meet, to shake hands, to talk about the lease, to talk about who we were over a kitchen table, and to begin establishing just a relationship. As I was able to meet with individuals, they were able to see, one, that I was a real person, two, hear from a real person that the company I was working for was also a real company, that it wasn't some sort of phone scam, which I got all the time when I was talking on the phone, and that they were able to know that whoever they were speaking with would be able to address their concerns, address their questions. It was an opportunity for them to be a little bit more frank, have a conversation with some candor as to what their concerns were, and how I could help resolve those questions. We didn't always do deals after I had met. I didn't sign a lot of deals in person, but a lot of those deals were able to go through because I met with those people in person, to shake a hand, to make an introduction, and to begin to develop that reputation and that relationship of trust. The other example I want to talk about, and then I'll come back to the takeaways, is a similar situation where I was meeting with a landowner, discussing a lease with a landowner. I'll call it, for the purpose of this story, I'll call it bonus schmonus, which is where a landowner who cared about the money, obviously, was glad to have a lease payment, a royalty payment potentially coming in, a bonus payment coming in. But his overarching concern was more, how is it going to affect my operation? How is this going to affect my property? You guys care that I've been here for 80 years. You guys care that I have an operation that has to work around you guys if I lease this out to you. And to be able to talk about, things like, who am I going to be able to call if I've got a question? If there's a problem, are you going to be able to be out there to resolve a concern? Calving time in February and March is a tough time of the year. Are you guys going to be out there causing additional stress on my cattle during that time of year when it's always miserable anyway? Or can we come to some sort of agreement on that? Or are you going to put a drilling pad, in this area of my center pivot, when I've got another area that is close by that I never use and can't use? Can you do something with that instead? Just having those conversations so that, in addition to getting a royalty payment or a bonus payment or whatever, which was great again, but that they were feeling like that they were partners and not just a hurdle to bring oil or natural gas out of the ground. Along with that that mentality, I had the opportunity to help them understand, and they had the opportunity to help me understand that an oil and gas lease is really just the beginning. As anybody who's been in the industry will tell you, it's before a piece of equipment hits the dirt, you're out there doing mineral title, you're out there doing oil and gas leasing, which defines your ability to be out there. And so thinking about kind of the big picture, what's the play at hand? What's the operation going to look like, so that I can negotiate each lease on, rather than a case-by-case basis, but as a part of a whole program to make operations easier, to make long-term access and viability of that project more effective. As I say here, money is one thing, but the long-term effects are another. And I found that, especially on private ownership, a couple of those people had owned that or been in the family since patent from the federal government back in the 1800s. Money was great, but when the money ran out, they were still going to be the owner. And so they wanted to know what the long-term effects were. Just some of the other questions. So on the upstream side, I think my takeaways are never underestimate the value of a handshake. Trust is earned, but candor will quickly build it. And as you can be upfront and direct and clear, transparent with the landowner, even if it's bad news, that goes a long way. And that honesty and integrity are essential. On that, the candor idea made me think of just one landowner. We had negotiated a lease. I think it was even pretty small. It wasn't like a huge lease for us. But after we had signed the lease, there were some title issues that were holding up payment. And I was getting a call once a week from this nice lady who was just wondering what was going on and where things were at. And I would, my phone would ring, I'd look at it, and I would just do it's one of, I knew exactly what that conversation was going to be. I just dreaded those conversations, but I took them, or if I didn't take it right away, I called her right back, and we had that conversation about what was going on. And I think she hated it as much as I did, but she told me on a few occasions that she appreciated knowing that even though she had a problem, and even though she knew she was a pain to talk to, she appreciated that she had a number that she could call and somebody would pick up. And I think that's a big part of what you do as landmen is your point of contact. You're the face of the company. And if you're picking up the phone and answering questions, that'll make things easier down the line. And those are tough calls to get. They're tough calls to make, but they pay dividends. Moving into more of what I do these days with Phillips 66, staying grounded in the midstream space, or sorry, but we've been here longer than you have. Which is kind of my general theme here. That sounds a little bit mean, and maybe it is. Midstream is a completely different animal than the upstream side. And that's basically, in my opinion, because rather than trying to to establish your rights and negotiate what rights you're going to have in the future, you're already relying on rights that have been negotiated decades, sometimes before you even got there. So this is a snapshot. Oops, back one. This is a snapshot of Colorado, Wyoming, and this is some of the Phillips 66 stuff that we've got. As you can see, come through central Colorado. The right-of-ways were negotiated in the late 40s. We got Pioneer Pipeline, which is 1952. We've got 70 Pipeline, which is 1963, and we've got the Powder River Pipeline, which is 1971. So I'm dealing with assets in my areas that are 50, 60, 70 years old. And it's a one-page document. I think I may even have a picture. This is a pretty standard document for that. It's one page. We've got right of ingress and egress here. That's nice, actually, that it's specifically identified. We've got the right to lay, maintain, inspect, alter, repair, operate, and protect, remove, relay pipeline or pipelines. What does that mean? To maintain, to operate, to build, inspect, repair, replace? Well, it's anyone's guess, really. It's a broad and short and ambiguous document, and our opportunity in the midstream space as a person in land is to be able to, one, understand what the rights of those documents are from case law in those states, and to be able to articulate those rights to the landowners that we interact with. It's a difficult thing in midstream because budget's traditionally a little bit tighter. The project's already done, and so any extra cost that we incur is something that takes away from the bottom line right away. And so we try not to do anything that is going to add additional cost and or worse yet, set a new precedent for how we operate on that right away. So if we have the right to inspect and maintain and to do so, we are asking landowners if it's okay if we come across a road over a period of time. They're going to now assume that we need their permission to do that when it may be implicit in the right, or we've got 40 years of using that road without their permission that we can rely on. And just being careful about how we mitigate and preserve our rights. The term we like to use a lot in the midstream space is don't fritter. We don't want to fritter away our rights by doing something in the short term that's easier, but that's going to cause us problems in the long term. A little bit of a story of some ongoing stuff here. We've got a family H in Montana who in order to get to the right of way, we've got to cross their property for a few, maybe a couple miles. And we have done that since the early 60s, but due to a large project that occurred a few years ago, we negotiated an agreement that would allow us to build up and improve the road to get the equipment in there that we needed. Based on that change, they had now decided that in order for Phillips to get into that property, we're going to have to sign a road use agreement. And for the small fee of $40,000 a year, we were going to be allowed to continue to access that road. And you know, the outcome on that is up in the air. It's a kind of a new thing for us, but it illustrates how easily it is for you to do something that is convenient and maybe nice even, and how that can kind of escalate if you're not careful and set expectations. The other problem is we get, especially in this area of the state of Wyoming, is that it's pretty close knit communities. And so you do a favor for one of those guys, pretty soon everybody's aware of it, and you've now set the new bar for what's expected. So midstream, more money, more problems. It's a famous poet / philosopher once said. As soon as you start spending money, the price tag goes up. And so a good takeaway from land work in the midstream group is to just be consistent. Understand your rights and be consistent across the area, so that when people look to the left or right of the right of way, they're seeing the same kind of approach, and it can help you out. Right of way document. Just a quick kind of other thing we're looking at, the good, the bad, and the ugly. Because some of those pipelines have been in the ground for so long, you see development come to those right-of-way areas. And part of the responsibility we have in land in the midstream space is to preserve and protect those right-of-ways. Got the good here to start out, and you can kind of see it. We've got a dedicated green space where our two pipelines run through. And that helps us avoid issues with landowner damages. It guarantees our access, and it really defines our right in the corridor there. It helps us access, inspect, maintain, repair, those buzzwords that we love in the midstream world, without a lot of interaction from homeowners and landowners and dealing with those disputes. The bad, you can see, is the opposite problem, where we run right through backyards. This is a small segment in Utah. And we still have the right to repair, build, maintain, inspect, those kind of things. But instead of having a clear defined corridor, we're now working with each of these landowners to get in, to pay damages, to do what we need to do. And those don't always go very well. It's not ideal. The ugly, in this case, this is near Casper, and the original line ran right through this kind of subdivision here, which looked a lot like Utah. And in order to do the work that we needed to do, it was found to be better for Phillips to just reroute several miles of pipeline around that facility. That's ugly because the cost of that is, rather than exercising and enforcing our rights here in this subdivision, we're spending a couple $1 million to put new pipe in. As a result, we've got newer right-of-way, maybe a little bit clearer, but definitely not as old, and just an extra cost. And this is a property, just to be clear, that the pipelines don't actually run, the mapping's just a little bit off. We run right next to this building. This building happens to be a popular fast food chain. I'm not going to name names, but it rhymed with McDonald's. And as you can imagine, having not a clear space for right away there, it's difficult to work with and repair and replace. We in fact had to this spring tear up this part of the right of way there, and it's been an ordeal to work with those guys and make sure everything's satisfactory. And just having that foresight, avoiding these kind of builds, protecting your rights so you avoid these kind of issues, that's the long-term goal of midstream. Get into a legal perspective. I'm gonna try to follow a couple quotes here. Those who live by the right of way die by the right of way. I'm sure a litigation attorney has said that somewhere. And the other quote, outrageous, egregious, and preposterous, from the world famous Jackie Childs. In taking a legal perspective, it's important to think about what the facts are. What are your facts and what are your rights? We've got I guess I could tell a quick story. We've got an owner here. That's a reference to an owner in northern Colorado, where he had a problem with us using his, we'll call it a driveway. It's a road onto a kind of an open area where his house was, and that's how we have been getting to a valve set, a block valve set that we had. And he decided that he was tired of us using this dirt driveway, and so he was going to ask us to enter a road use agreement. We looked at a number of different things, whether we should do the road use agreement, whether there was an alternate route that we could use, whether we should just come down the right of way. And ultimately what we decided was that we have a historical right through historical use, and that we would continue to use that road. And the idea here is to not minimize your rights through concession, by doing anything other than what was within our rights, we would have basically waived our rights to that historical access route. And that was something that would have caused us problems as we brought additional equipment in, as we had people coming in and out. We kindly declined his offer to get a road use agreement for a small nominal fee. But just because we exercise our rights and choose to exercise our rights doesn't mean that we can't have some sort of concessions. We didn't want to enter a road use agreement, but we did agree to notifications for larger projects to help him aware of what was coming in. We agreed to a speed limit and to try to minimize the impact to him. So while we didn't want to give away any of our rights, we did decide that as a best practice, it was better to try to meet him somewhere in the middle on some of those concerns that he had. Just kind of rounding out a legal perspective, the late great Kenny Rogers, I think, outlined it best. You got to know when to hold them, know when to fold them, know when to walk away, and know when to run. I mean, a lot of these are largely fact-based scenarios. When you've got good facts, when you've got good documents, it's time to make a stand. And I'm involved in two issues that are litigated right now. And I've done my best in those instances to, I guess, take a stand where the facts are best going to support our priorities. So out of all, we've got a tree clearing dispute in Utah. And out of all the people who we could choose to fight that battle on, I've helped us pick the 2 or 3 landowners that have the worst facts, so that when those things go to summary judgment, if they go to trial, the best case is being put forward in those instances. I've also referenced another litigation where, rather than the facts being necessarily good, we've got good documents. We've got an old right of way, and then we've got several subsequent agreements with the other party that very expressly identifies what our rights are and what they're required to do. And when they're refusing to hold up their end of the agreement, we can kind of nail them to it. So that's knowing your facts, knowing when to fold them. I've got the Pawnee grassland. We've got about 11 miles that runs through the Pawnee National Grassland down in Colorado, and you just can't negotiate with Uncle Sam. The federal government has a permit that they require, and that's just what it is, and you just eat it. You just got to fold them and take what you can get there. Walk away. City and County of Denver is notoriously hard for us to work for. And so we just agreed that they don't need to sign any agreements. We're not, and we're just going to do what we can under a right-of-way agreement. You run into the same thing with landowners on the upstream side. There's just some people that you'll never come to an agreement with. Right? And rather than making an agreement that is so bad that nobody's ever going to want that lease or that surface agreement, you just got to walk away sometimes and do your best with that. And know when to run. I guess the joke at Phillips 66 is anything dealing with the railroads. Those guys are God's gift to land. They'll tell you they own the place, they run the place, and they have been forever. And getting through a railroad is notoriously difficult. You should be running forward in those because it takes so long to get those agreements through. You should be running away from anything that's going to minimize your ability to operate in the future. Private access agreements, bad forms, major concessions, run away from those kind of things. So kind of round out legal, know your documents, know the rules and regulations where possible. Look for those good facts. All right, I think we're just about close here. Quick summary for upstream inland. Think long-term and think about building those relationships. Have that integrity. Be clear, be straightforward. Under promise and over deliver where possible. In the midstream, know your documents, understand the facts, and And money is a short-term fix, a long-term problem. Legal, facts are the facts, and pick your battles. Sometimes you got good facts and you can do something with it. Sometimes you don't, and that's okay. That's just how the ball bounces. I guess that's a quick overview of my experience. Again, thank you for coming here and listening to me talk for the last half hour or so. Got a few minutes for questions for anybody who has.
I've got a question about the planning and planning process.
Okay.
Could you showed us some of those horror story videos or images of
Yeah.
Backyards right above the pipeline?
Mhm.
It seems like during the planning and planning process, the existing right of ways should be part of that, and a developer should know there's a pipeline running underneath the lots I'm selling. How on earth did that situation arise where the right allegedly existed but was unknown to people who currently own the surface? Or that it was such a bad layout of the lot sizes? How did that happen?
So it's a great question, and I've asked myself that a few times. I think in these instances, part of the problem is there's a disconnect between the planning and the development of that. So in that area of Utah, the process at the time was that the planning was done separately. It could be approved kind of just in its own sphere, and there wasn't a lot of outside input. And then a second developer could come in. They would buy that plat as is and build according to how those lots were laid out. And that's when we would get notified that there was a development, that they would make the 811 calls and say, hey, we're building on this plat, and this is how it's going to go. And so we were already behind the gun on that thing when it started building. And so to alleviate that, we worked really hard at reaching out to a lot of those municipal bodies and saying, hey, if you've got anything going on in this area, we need to know ahead of time so that we can have our input. And most people are responsive to that, knowing that it's a high pressure interstate pipeline. They're ready to accommodate a little bit more from that. So, thank you. Yeah, please.
Had a pipeline running under the trial that chase the value of property.
I don't know if there's an additional cost or anything on that with regard to the property tax. I don't think there is. I think for Phillips, we're assessed the tax based on our infrastructure, but I think that's separate from the home value and the home ownership. There's probably some argument out there that a right-of-way encumbering property is going to diminish the value of a property, but depending on, it's all kind of site specific and location based. Thank you. Yeah, please.
Do you think that having a law degree sets you apart from other candidates? Like, would you encourage us to go get a law degree to do what you do?
That's a great question, and my first response is I try to talk as many people out of law school as I think I've talked into it. I think there is a tremendous value to law school in working in land, and I think part of that value is just understanding kind of the greater legal realm of the contracts of property law and those kind of things. I think you can get a lot of that same value, especially from programs like the PLM program. A lot of that kind of underscores and it has core value in that. I think if you go into law school with the mindset that maybe I don't want to practice law, but I want to round out my education or become a kind of unique candidate, I think there's value in doing that. To me, you got to look at the time and the opportunity cost, right? Is it worth the 3 years? Is it worth the tuition? Is it worth kind of the headache and stress of law school? For me, it worked out. I've got other classmates who do a lot with law, and it's worked out for them. I think there's some advantage. I don't think it's essential. And I think if you are in the right program, I think, you know, the University of Wyoming does a great job of giving you that training, and that I think you can find other ways to be just as kind of unique and stand out. It's kind of a non-answer. I apologize, but that's it. I think there's value, but I don't think it's a necessity by any means. If that answers your question. Yeah.
So you mentioned implied rights, and you seem to sort of imply that they are really helpful because you can just continue to exercise them as long as you historically have had them and you continue operating as though you have them, you keep having them.
Yep.
They seem though like they should be way weaker than explicit right or even an oral contract. How would you rate implicit rights in a hierarchy of other rights? What's weaker than them? What's stronger than them? Or is there some other factor that matters more than anything else?
Yeah, I think you're right. I think it's as far as the tier of strength, it's on the lower end. And part of the necessity of an implied right comes just from a vague document. Right? If you had a right-of-way document that was perfect and outlined and defined your rights in every situation, that's obviously going to have the most clarity. Situations where we're exercising implied rights is most typically in ingress and egress situations where we've got a pipeline right away, and we'll call it a 50-footer out in the middle of nowhere. But to get to that area, I could probably point it out somewhere here. So we've got a right of way coming through this part of Wyoming, and the highway is, you know, miles to the east or the west. And so we're taking a 2-track for 78 miles to get to that corridor. And so we have a right to access that in that area of the pipeline. And to do so, we've traversed unencumbered portions of property. And so those are difficult because an implied right generally takes some amount of historical use, or it takes a determination from a court that you have a right. And so it's tentative until it's confirmed or ratified by a court. We rely on a lot with landowners and just say, hey, we've been doing this for 50 years. If you had a problem with it, you should have said something 40 years ago. And we mitigate that as much as we can by understanding that we're liable for the damages that we cause to crops, to livestock, those kind of things, and help make people whole. We're not in the business of helping people find a windfall, but just try to find those middle grounds. Yeah, please.
Are there any rights that you may be able to document their use historically, but that you nonetheless would potentially lose the ability to use if they're not kind of exercised regularly?
Yeah, we were talking about this a little bit this morning. A lot of because of how long ago it was in our document, we've got blanket right away, which means we encumber, in some cases, an entire section for a pipeline that's a single line that goes through that section. And the reality of the situation is that we're not going to use that entire section. Once we've built the pipeline, we're pretty tied to that corridor, just economically and practically. And so if we're not doing something to actively protect that extra right of way, there's probably an argument that we've lost that right, or we have that, we no longer need that extra area. I think that's ambiguous. I think we still rely on those blankets as far as ingress and egress, maybe not so much for inspection and maintaining and building. But I think that's probably the biggest area where there's a lot of gray area in how we use those rights. Thanks, great question. Yeah.
could you kind of talk about like in your career, what a day-to-day like looks like for you?
Sure. Currently or before or
Whatever.
all over?
Yeah, yes, sir.
You know, I'll just start upstream. That's chronologically, it makes sense. A lot of what I did was just making phone calls and arranging meetings, and drafting and revising leases to help meet people's expectations. Very, very people focused. It's almost like a sales job, really, that's for me, because you're just constantly reaching out, trying to get a hold of people, sending letters, sending emails, making phone calls, and just helping try to make those contacts and make those deals happen. At Phillips, it's a little bit more variable. In March, it's March 2022. In these 3 months, I've already done completely different stuff than I did last year. Last year, there was a lot of just maintenance work, so it was a lot of landowner notifications, damage payments for when we completed a dig or a maintenance program. Those kind of issues were pretty day to day. This month, it's just been a lot of, I've been doing a lot of permitting at the county level or the city level. Some of our litigation's heated up, and so I've been dealing a lot with getting our documents together, helping kind of craft a narrative, helping the attorneys understand the facts on the ground, and a lot of that goes with that litigation. It's a lot more of a mixed bag. I will say that since the pandemic, since 2020, landowner, property owner, just kind of any contact person to person has been a lot more tough. People a little bit more on edge than they were a few years ago. Everybody's just a little bit more protective of their rights, of their space. And I think we've probably changed that permanently, where it just takes just a little bit more understanding, at least in those initial contexts, of being more empathetic to people's concerns and their rights. And you know, you can tell people that what you have or what you're doing and you have the right to do, but you can do it in a nice way, and just kind of coming across as a more empathetic person, I think goes a long way. Just a lot of variability in the day to day, I think. So probably again not really answering your questions too great, but yeah, please.
So, in the case when you said there was the highway access, I'm assuming that's actually fine. And then there was the pipeline.
Yep.
Like 10 miles out or something. What goes into the process, and is involved in terms of deciding where that is? And as, like you said, it's not as convenient because you're having to go on a 2-track.
Yeah.
Farther away. What goes into that process? What else is involved?
So if we do a new right, that's a new right of way is going to be driven by operations and the engineering. So they're going to say, you know, these are the reasons we need a new pipeline, or we need to do a different lane or a new right of way. They'll say, this is our requirements, and they'll say, you know, basically that's secure the right of way, secure the access, secure those kind of things. When it initially went in, you know, just the entire landscape was different, and you know, probably I-25 may have been new or not there, and there may have been other access points at that time, and over time, that's just how our historical access occurred. A lot of times too, you know, in the 60s, as we started coming in and building and maintaining, the people who signed the original documents were operating those sections, and they knew who we were, and they were okay with us coming in because they understood that's just how we had to get in there. And as those properties have changed hands, that's where we start to see some of those conflicts. They were the original signer of the right-of-way document, and maybe they're trying to assert their rights as far as they understand it. Does that answer your question? Yeah, please.
Have you ever been handed a situation where like somebody's bedside manner has like made your job like way, way harder? Like if you inherit some case or some section and you find like, oh, wow, the guy before me or the gal before me must have just been so like unempathetic or whatever, or rude or.
Yeah. When I was working for a choir, I had that, and there was a lot of contractors buying leases, doing deals. And I got handed a fair amount of contacts from somebody who was kind of a burn bridge kind of guy. He was getting deals done, but then he wouldn't answer the phone. He wouldn't respond to emails. And it took a lot, and it wasn't universally successful, but it took a lot of work and a lot of stress to kind of get those people on the phone. And just a side note, to that point exactly, the importance of integrity and character in those situations is there's always something that's going to go wrong. You're gonna run into those landowners 100% of the time if it's a bad experience. That's Murphy's Law. That's a universal law. If everything goes good, you probably never have to work with them again. That's been my experience. And so, the mindset that I just need to get this deal done and then I don't have to work with these people again is almost always wrong. So if you can, even if you tell them bad news, you say, look, man, we can't do that. It's just not going to work out, or I'm sorry, this is something that's frustrating for everybody, but I'm gonna do what I can. That'll go a long way. And so, yeah, I guess in that sense, it just takes a lot of work to get that trust back, or at least get them to take a phone call and been sworn at and said a lot of things, and that's okay. That's part of the job, I guess. Yeah.
So what is something you know or do now that you wish you knew when you started?
I think I wish I would have just been had a better understanding of the big picture. A lot of thinking about not a one-off lease was something that I hadn't always understood. And I was to some extent that guy that I was just trash talking a little bit. I was just trying to get a deal done. I tried to do it nicer and try to be more clear, but if we had to slash and burn the lease to get it signed, I was all for that, just because I needed to get it done. And just really thinking that, what's the big picture? How do I approach this so that in the next year, in the next 5 years, the next 10 years, as this well is operating or this area is operating, that this isn't going to be the blot on the operations. This isn't the thing that they've got to dump a bunch of extra time and money into because they agreed on a lease that was just terrible. So having that long-term perspective. Yeah.
You say that growing up in Wyoming kind of helped you establish connections with people that live in the West out here compared to somebody that's maybe from the South or something?
Yeah, absolutely. This is, I'm going to try not to sound disparaging here, but in North Dakota, a lot of the landmen who work for some of the major operators, they would, according to landowners, I never heard it personally, I'll say that again. They said, they would always say, well, this isn't how we do it in Texas, right? That was like the thing. And you want to drive a landowner crazy anywhere other than Texas, just compare it to Texas. And I said, I'm from a small town, I'm, from Wyoming, we're the same. I get it, and I understood to some extent farm life, ranch life. I understood livestock a little bit. And I had that background. I wasn't this city slicker, I guess. I don't know. It wasn't some transplant from the city that was trying to do a deal. I understood, and I agree. I think that didn't help grease a lot of wheels.
Okay, I want to thank everyone for
Got-
coming
got
today.
one
Oh,
more in
one
back,
more.
I think.
Okay.
Pipeline transport is very
also concerned transporting the electric pipeline, even though it's proven safer technology than like rail car, like trucks. I think that's something right there. You have pipelines and trucks. The point I want to make is that given we see that lawyers find cognizant of these issues in different places, people are going to bring this thing up. If there's an accident, yes, you can measure the pressure of the pipeline and you can see the pressure of the natural gas pipeline. I can see this is a very complex issue. Lawyers are going to have comments on the technical issues of things that can go wrong.
Yeah.
And shaking.
That's right. No, I think that's a great point. And I didn't touch on it, but I think one of the most valuable things I've done here at Phillips 66 is try to ingratiate myself to the operations side and really get that technical understanding because it's right, as you know, you don't always understand how much engineering goes into a pipeline infrastructure, but we've got remote sensors and monitors all through the pipeline. We've got cathodic protection. We've got, we run inline tools that help us determine if there's anomalies in the pipeline that are causing concern. We do aerial inspections, we do foot inspections. We do the 811 stuff to help people know that we're there so that they don't do something to interfere with the pipeline. And just understanding, like you said, you know, what are our safety precautions in place so that we can help alleviate a concern from a landowner, that we can speak to, you know, how high of a risk are we looking at for this type of infrastructure? I think that's exactly right. You know, at Phillips, our motto is safety, honor, commitment. Safety being number one, and we live and die by that. Our logo is a shield, and we stand behind that shield of safety because we understand that it doesn't just affect us; it affects everybody when there's an issue. So we really work hard to maintain that. So I appreciate it. Thank you for that.
Any other questions? All right, thank you all so much for coming, and we want to thank Jared for being here with us.